Okay, let me explain. I'm a little frustrated this morning because I found out that interacting with people in my own private groups that I've set up with people puts you in Facebook jail. This is a real thing, people. This is crazy. Unbelievable to me that they're crunching down and making things harder and crazy and whatever. I thought I was free too, Jill, but I'm not. It was just on my personal page where I was interacting with people on there. But if I go to any of my groups, which right now I've got about a dozen that I'm managing with clients in them and groups that we're coaching, and being able to interact in between is really a big part of the experience for those clients in bigger groups to get access to me and my dad. And I'm in there this morning, got into my office at the crack of dawn to get caught up on some interaction in the groups. And I get to about my 8th interaction, watching some Facebook Lives that I challenged them to do as a part of the group. And I'm going through them and commenting. And then all of a sudden Facebook's like, we don't like what you're doing. It's against community guidelines. And I'm like, I'm writing encouraging, positive, inspiring stuff in here. And you're going to really, you're going to lock me out? Not cool. So anyway, that's why I wanted to start this live with my little protest against these challenges. It said you can submit your feedback. They basically said, submit your feedback. We're not really going to read it, but it might help us in the future if we ever care to take a look, or if enough people submit feedback. So submit feedback. Maybe we'll get them to pay attention. So thanks, David. Yeah, boo Facebook jail for sure. But it's funny because I've seen a couple of people commenting like, is this a real thing? So, all right, that's not what we're talking about today, but it can contribute to a lot of different challenges that we will address today, to a lot of different things that we find ourselves dealing with that we may not have understood at the level that I hope to open up today to give you an opportunity to dive in. Those of you that are just joining us, and I know where my eraser is this time. Let me grab it real quick. I realized I forgot to make sure I've got it with me, and because my black marker is dying, I'll grab the smaller one. So anyway, this was my little protest to Facebook jail, which is a real thing. I can't comment or like on any of my groups. I can on my personal page, and I can still post in any of those. So I posted a group comment essentially about what was going on. But anyway, really silly. We'll work through it though. But today we're going to talk about some things that make it a little tougher to be able to do this. Now, when we're dealing with thoughts and thinking patterns, okay, I want to lay this out real quick just as some of the groundwork for what we're going through today. Remember, there are typically 3 areas that we're working on for our development, okay? We've got what we're going to call the do area, okay? This is the behavioral area. This is what you do, what you don't do, the strategies, the ideas, okay? Then we've got, if we go a little further upstream, then we get to the feel area. So now we've got the do, which is required to create anything. That's why Og said in scroll number 9 that your goals are impossible, your plans are dust, all of are no value unless you act, which is under the do category, okay? But then we've got the feel, and under the feel category is going to be emotions and personality, things like this. And then we come up here, and we've got think. That's as far upstream as you can get, okay? So down here, we're trying to impact our results. Well, this is the conveyor belt. This is what does it. This is where we create success. This is where we create what we're looking for, is if we can understand how we think, we can better understand how we feel and how to use it, and we can better sustain what we're doing. That's what we're doing here. That's what habit finding is. We're finding the habits of thought. That's what we're trying to find. When we're habit finders, we're trying to find the habits of thinking that are making positive and negative. We want to understand both sides, the sabotaging and the supporting, okay, of our feelings and our personality, which is just the feelings that we've memorized, okay, and be able to understand this so that we can make a more positive impact on what we're doing. The challenge is most people are fighting upstream. Most of us are trying to do the things that will allow us to feel this because we think that that's how we're going to solve the problem. Pay attention to, because this is where this has come from. A consumer is someone who is over-focused on what they want to be able to do so that they can feel a certain way, thinking that that's what's going to solve the emptiness or not feeling like enough. And it doesn't work. You can't get upstream backwards. You've got to start there and be able to make that influence on the way down, okay? This is the direction it flows. But this is the direction that we fight, which leaves us frustrated and empty and leaves us needing to fill that emptiness with consumption. And we become consumers. Now, there's nothing wrong with being a consumer as long as you are consuming on purpose and you are consuming intentionally. But the risk is that marketers, product salespeople, know something that a lot of you don't. Okay? A lot of you don't know that there are 3 things that drive your consumption. 3 things that leave you feeling empty or lacking or afraid of or needing that drive your consumption. And here's the biggest challenge, is it drives it irrationally. It is irrational, meaning it doesn't make sense. But we have this gift as human beings of being able to take irrationality and be able to what is called confabulate, for your vocabulary lesson today, to confabulate our irrational, confabulate is our mind's incredible and lightning fast ability to take something that is irrational and have it become irrational in our mind. We do that with reasons. We do that with excuses, justifications, all of it, in an opportunity to take the irrational behavior that really drives consumption, that really drives us to be a consumer of things, filling a gap in our soul, our lives, our emotions, what we can or can't do. Remember the flow. We're over-focused on the do, can't do, and the feel and don't feel. We're at risk of becoming a consumer, which is irrationally driven by these 3 things. These are the 3 things that cause us to act irrationally and then fill in the blanks after the fact so quickly. In fact, we fill in the blanks, we confabulate so fast that it feels like we were thinking, it feels like we were being irrational from the get-go, but we weren't. And here's the 3 reasons why. These are the 3 things that drive us to go the opposite direction and us to be consumers of the things that are empty within us that we don't feel like we're enough. Because that's really what that's what all consumption is based off of. Some kind of insinuation that you're not enough, so you need to do this to feel like enough. You need to have this to feel like you're enough. But we're still in the do and have, do and have, do and have. And the feel and do and have and feel and do and who and have and do. Okay? It's in this vicious cycle, and we're going to break down one of the worst little microcosms of this cycle in just a minute. But these are the 3 things driving your behavior. And I'm setting this up so that those of you who are going, yeah, it makes total sense. I totally get why I do that, and it's different for me. And I have all these reasons, and I have all these well-constructed excuses, and I'm really good at justifying. If you're willing to look at that, it's going to serve you really, really well. Rational lies. Exactly. And so the first thing is survival. Survival is the #1 driver of consumption. It'll motivate you irrationally, meaning you cannot consciously grab onto it. It doesn't make sense until someone says, why'd you buy that? And then confabulation kicks in to the point that we felt like the argument that we make in real time was actually already in place before we bought, but it's not the case. It's why marketers stopped asking what people needed to see on a website to buy, because they didn't know. And what they thought they needed to see isn't what they actually needed to see. It was actually something that was driving these 3 things, okay? This is important for those of you who work within a space of some kind of, Rosanna's on a roll, not confabulous. This is great. I love this. Sorry. I'm a sucker for play on words. I can go all day. Okay. So, but those of you who work in something to be consumed, whether it's a product or a service, you're going to want to understand these three and be able to help your language and your offering stay really simple around these three things, because you're going to understand most people are going to choose to do what you have to offer irrationally. They just are. But your ability to understand that and help them confabulate constructively and not just see them irrationally dive into the product or service that you offer, and then they disappear a few weeks later when they realize their reasons weren't strong enough, their excuses weren't solid enough, and their justification couldn't last. So first is survival, okay? Second is sex, which the more PC term would be reproduction. This is evolutionary psychology. This is nothing new, okay? But they would refer to it as reproduction, okay? As being attractive to the tribe, okay? A lot of this comes from tribal mentality. Survival being number one, sex number two, okay? How attractive am I? How the opportunity to reproduce, to have legacy, to have something outlive you. Number three is status. These are the three things that drive 99.9% of your irrational behavior. If you don't think these have huge hooks in you, you are lying to yourself and not doing yourself any good. It's like ego. These exist. Don't try and get rid of it. Understand them. Understanding these drives and these irrational drivers in yourself will help you to be able to understand it even better in others, and being able to guide them through this irrational rationalization that most of us live in, where we're getting stuck into this cycle of focusing on what we don't have to feel a way we don't feel because we think that that's what we need. Well, we're challenging you to go right to the source of what you're thinking rather than doing and not feeling and realizing that what you were thinking was wrong. Because if we think correctly, we become more aware of all this stuff. We become more aware of our irrational behavior. We can build habits around it to support it. We'll have a conversation another day, in fact, in terms of how you can harness this information from more of a contributing standpoint, because you understand this in other people. You've got some huge keys to being able to connect with what they really want, and the language that you're listening for, and the language that you're using that can push these buttons appropriately, okay? And I stress appropriately, because many have used this information to manipulate people, many. And that's not something that we condone, that's not something that we teach, and that's not something that you can do with the principles that we teach. You can't fake what we teach. The first foundational principle to everything that we teach is love. Not just any love, but the highest form of love that there is. So what we want to understand is, as we're going through habit finding, as we're going through this process of changing the way we think, we've got to challenge it at the headwater. We've got to challenge it at the source of the spring. The source wasn't that we did this or we didn't do that, and so we felt this or we didn't feel that. That's the cycle we get stuck in over and over and over again. And there's a particular cycle within that we're going to talk about today that's really critical. But I want you to understand the bigger picture as well. If we're going to dive into the weeds, I want you to understand why. I want you to see the bigger picture so it's worth being in the weeds. So you can understand that this constant frustration that leads to being an irrational consumer, which goes hand in hand. It's a little redundant. Consumers are irrational, period, okay? And doing so, we can understand the cycle that we're about to break down here, which is the obligation cycle, which unfortunately will sound way too familiar to many of us. Okay, any questions about this before we shift? Okay, I know I've got a little bit of a lag, so I'm going to get a little hydration here, a little green drink. See if there's any questions. Throw them in the chat. Nothing? Nobody? I forget how much the lag is on this, so I want to make sure I don't move on questions. Okay, I'll watch for questions to come through. I'd love for any questions you've got around what that first initial conversation. What's the moral of that story before we move into the obligation cycle? The moral of the story is understanding that too many of us are caught in this counterintuitive, fighting against ourselves kind of space in life because we're trying to do things backwards. Okay? We're trying to do or have certain things because we're so convinced that that's finally going to allow us to feel X. And why? Because that's how we thought. So let's go after the thinking. That's what we're doing here. And it's amazing when we're willing to, that's not a little, I was just going to, yeah, anyway. It's going over my head. Got it. Okay. Good stuff from Rita, powerful stuff. I'm starting to question my status as a sexy survivalist now. That's awesome. Okay, Crystal, let me simplify for you. And I'm so glad you said that. Thank you, because that's so helpful to probably another dozen or 24 people on here that are feeling like it's going over their head as well. Let me break down, because I got all, admittedly, okay, someone can call tabs on me, and those of you who have not been in the power sessions consistently, tabs is our safe word, okay? So getting an opportunity to be able to understand that my mind goes a million miles an hour, loves big words and major concepts that I try to make really simple. Allow me to do so. Not, Crystal, because you're not intelligent. Quite the opposite. I've had an opportunity to spend a good amount of time with you. You are very intelligent and very gifted. And in fact, part of that is what led to asking making such a great comment to say it's going over my head, to give me an opportunity to summarize. All I was trying to summarize, okay, is that we've got the do space, the feel space, and the think space. And your thinking wants you to believe that there are things you are doing or not doing, okay? There are things you are doing or not doing that are the reason you're feeling or not feeling something, because that's what you think. This is what your mind wants you to do. And then because of this backwards combination, things like survival and sex and status can drive this into overdrive, turbocharge the irrational behavior that comes from this. The irrational belief that there is something you are doing or not doing that's the reason you're feeling or not feeling, because that's what you think. So rather than fall into this cycle, we want to break this cycle right here, okay? We want to take out, rather than using my hand, okay? I want to take out this piece. And this is true development. This is creating success. This is habit finding, is rather than just allowing our thinking to dictate our doing and feeling and then coming back to reinforce our thinking. Because if I do or don't do this, and then I do or don't feel this, and then our thinking can confabulate and create reasons and excuses, it's always going to keep circling us back this way and around and around and around. But what we'll want to do is become conscious of when our mind has us over-focused on what we're doing or not doing. So when we feel like we need to be doing something, we have to be doing something, we're supposed to be doing something, what we're falling into right here, just in this space, is what we're going to break down in just a second, which is called the obligation cycle. It's the one thing that makes it the hardest to break out of the cycle I just have drawn out, okay? So when we're over-focused on what we should do or what we don't do, I don't know what I should do. I'm doing it, but I'm not feeling the results. I don't feel like we want to stop and challenge. Stop and challenge which direction it's coming from. Is it because there's a feeling that I'm seeking, or is it because of a thought that was constructively built to be able to influence what I'm feeling and therefore make an impact on what I'm doing? That's all we're talking about, is being able to stop and be conscious of this cycle and go time out. And we actually exercise one of our greatest gifts, Crystal, okay? We exercise one of our greatest gifts, which is metacognition. Metacognition is the ability to think about your own thinking. So when you're in this cycle, that your thinking has you focused on what you're doing or not doing, having and not having, and what you're feeling and not feeling because of it, to reinforce the thinking as it continues to go around. Metacognition is the ability to step back from that very cycle and observe it. It's a simple thing, and it feels weird for people to do it on purpose, but we do it all the time. We create filters, and we create things that we're not quite sure we should say, and all kinds of stuff can come into the use or lack thereof of metacognition, okay? So I'm asking you, okay, awesome. Thanks, Crystal. I'm asking you to step back and think about this first. Before we even dive into the weeds of the obligation cycle, I want you to realize that this is the pattern that most people live. This is why consumption, this is why being a consumer is the most profitable industry in the world. Consumption, it is. Just because the majority of the population is thinking in a way that's not serving them, that's causing them to over-focus on what they're doing and not doing, or having and not having, because that's the reason they're not feeling this, or they are feeling that. And then it comes back to reinforcing the thinking and going back and around and around and around. So I'm asking people to step back and go, okay, I'm focused on what I'm doing or not doing. Which direction am I headed? And if you're in the obligation cycle, which I'm going to break down in just a second, you're headed the wrong direction. How do you head the right direction? You've got to join the conversation in your mind. You've got to challenge your thinking, okay? That's habit finding, okay? Exercising metacognition and being able to challenge this process is habit finding. And it is the greatest prerequisite to creating sustainable success that there is. Now, fortunately, we've invested several $1 million and countless hours over the last 19 years to give you a technology, okay, that tells you exactly where to focus and what it sounds like in its most common form, called the habit finder. The habit finder is measuring what's going on here, whether you are conscious of it or not. There is an unlimited supply of information and ability to grow and understand yourself deeper and deeper and deeper from the habit finder. But if you're stuck in this cycle, your thinking is constantly going to be trying to kick that out because it's getting in the way of just staying in this predictable consuming cycle. So first we find the habit finder, then we can use the habit finder to apply correct principles. And applying correct principles based on the way you think is the only way to actually disrupt this pattern. Otherwise, you're just pushing against it for as long as you possibly can and then diving out of the way just before it runs you over. Anybody living life this way? It's a little frustrating and exhausting, and none more exhausting than the obligation cycle, okay? Norma's saying, are you saying believe first? Now that's tough, okay? Because that can be interpreted by a lot of people in a lot of different ways. Excuse me. Because one of the biggest challenges to all of this, okay, which was almost going to be my topic for today, a couple of people were asking about it and mentioning it on my team and elsewhere. But all of this has to do with this. Self-worth keeps us locked into the lack that we feel here and capitalizes on it and getting us to consume more of what we're doing or not doing, what we should do, what we shouldn't do, to somehow satisfy the feeling. But guess what self-worth is? This was actually suggested as a topic from a member of my team, what self-worth really is. Self-worth is a set, 6 of them in fact. It's simply a set of thought processes that are allowing you to either clearly or not clearly connect to your intrinsic worth, to your beliefs, to your abilities, to your character, to your contributions. How clearly are you able to intrinsically connect to that? And disruption in that area causes us to fall into this cycle. That's what we're facing. And the challenge was saying just believe first. Is self-worth, key term being self, okay? If we were thinking about believe, Norma, the last person to believe in you is who? Anybody? Who's the last person to believe in you? It's you. So when I say believe first, I want to make sure that's pointed in the right direction. Believe that your thoughts are sabotaging you. Yes. Believe that the habit finder is one of the most solid, advanced pieces of technology to measure that noise that's ever been created on Earth. Believe that applying correct principles, as counterintuitive as they might feel, and as slow as it might feel compared to just focusing on what you do and don't do, believing that that is correct. In the times that your brain is working against you to convince you otherwise, that is what I would totally agree with in terms of believe first. But too often, believe first is taken internally as believe in me first. Believing in you is the last thing that happens. After we get an opportunity to measure, shift, habit find, and apply correct principles, and then have enough time go by that we can reinforce the thoughts, the actual neural thought processes, okay? We're looking at this, okay? We're getting a little intense here, so let me know if we go too deep, okay? But here's how it's going, okay? Here's your choice. And here's a neural pathway. A neural pathway that could go to old patterns and a neural pathway that we can create. It's called neuroplasticity. We can change the way the brain operates. That could go to new patterns. Now, old patterns have been chosen more and oftentimes unconsciously. So this pattern is worn in really well. It's really easy to go this direction. But now we've got a new pattern and we want to wear it in. Remember what you're competing against. And there's no set amount of time, okay? It takes 30 days to create a new habit. There's no solid evidence, okay, that can teach you or that can tell you how long it's going to take for you, okay? And the more ingrained the pattern, the more significant it is, the more it can play off of survival, sex, and status, the more difficult it will be for you to create the new pattern and to get it worn in enough. So just be ready to that. Believe in that. Believe in the fact that you can't start creating a new pattern and then sit there like you're cooking rice-a-roni going, okay, when is this thing going to be working for me rather than working against me? It's a commitment to being. And when we commit to be, that is a perpetual commitment. It never ends. So we embrace things that we would normally resist. We stop tracking things that we're counting and keeping score and all this different stuff that isn't serving us. All in an attempt to create a new pattern. It takes time. That's what we want to believe in. Is this belief about trust? Great question, Mel. In terms of trust is a huge misnomer, and we'll probably need to do a whole nother, in fact, this should be a whole other power session. But let me touch on one thing really quick, okay? Remember let me draw a mini version of it. The think, whoop, feel, whoop, do, whoop, which are also the areas that most people spend in their personal development. I'd probably say 90% plus of people spend 90% of their time and energy in the do area, and then 10%, actually 9%, spend it in the feeling and personality area, and probably 1% actually know how to do this. Now, a bigger percent are aware of this, but in terms of actually how to do it, not so much. Then you talked about trust. This is really important. This is the cycle that we fall into. Remember, this is how it's supposed to go. We become aware of our thoughts so that we can influence our feelings and focus on what we do. And a huge part of that, okay, is this. Commitment. Commitment is what allows us to be able to influence our feelings without being controlled by them. okay? To influence without being controlled. Controlled is bad, influence is good. And commitment is what does that. And commitment is what feeds trust. Commitment comes first. So a belief is a trust, but belief and trust are only as good as your commitment. Not your analytical evaluation of whether it deserves your trust or not. Whether we're talking about a spouse, a business opportunity, it's not a matter of your analytical, fundamental, logistical reasons and evaluation of whether they are worthy of trust. Trust is dictated by your commitment. And tough challenge along the lines of belief and trust. Most of the things you don't trust, and most of the people you probably don't trust, especially the ones that are closest to you, are because of a lack of commitment. Not because you purposely made a lack of commitment, but similar to getting this one backwards, okay? Look at this. Do, feel, think. When it's think, feel, do, okay? It's think this to influence your feelings, to do this, and come back and feel the payoff, okay? So it kind of circles back on itself. The commitment is what's determining the trust, because the commitment is exactly what bypasses the control of the feelings so that your thoughts can impact your doing without being controlled by your feelings, which are very unreliable. But when we make a commitment, the feeling we suddenly can find after the fact. Let's take love, for example, okay, in terms of a romantic relationship. Too many people will kind of kick rocks around and bounce around and try to make these extrinsic, external ideas around whether they love someone, missing the idea that love has a little bit of a disguise called infatuation. And infatuation is a feeling, and it can bypass the commitment. So suddenly we skip the commitment and go right to, I trust you. I totally trust you. But then they do something, oftentimes influenced by what we do unknowingly. Okay? And I'm not talking about extreme cases. I'm not talking about where someone was untrue or whatever the case is. I'm talking about the fact that when we skip the commitment because of infatuation, we jump into trust prematurely, and then we sabotage that trust because of the feelings that do or don't come. We're leaving it to a coin flip when commitment is not there. When you are committed, when you are all in, when you burn the ships, and remember, we don't burn the ships until we get the supplies off. Because I know a lot of clients that have been there. They burned the ships, but they didn't pull off their supplies first. It's a really important part. But oftentimes it came down to commitment or lack thereof. It's really hard because this formula brings us face to face with one of the most difficult equations that I ever faced in my life. And that was when my coach told me, he said, Paul, you have exactly what you want in your life. I was like, at the time, my life felt like it was falling apart, like just blowing up at the seams in every area. I was like, I don't buy it. It's like, no, the reality is you have everything that you want, that you really, truly desire. Because the things you really, truly don't desire, you're not committed to. And therefore, you're allowing something as fickle as your feelings to determine whether you trust it or not. So we almost do just enough to prove our concerns, to prove that it's not going to work because of a lack of commitment. Or we do too much that ends up feeling like our trust was betrayed, but we weren't committed in the first place. So we couldn't see it coming. So we were oblivious because of infatuation, which happens with more than just romantic relationships. But it all comes down to commitment. Commitment and what we're trying to really do, making a decision, is key, okay? A decision is being committed, and trust comes as a natural result of that commitment. When too often, similar to how we go backwards here, we focus on what we're doing or not doing, having or not having, because we think it'll make us feel a certain way, and then it just reaffirms what we were irrationally thinking. We do the same thing here, okay? We feel a certain way about someone, so we think we're going to start to trust them. And as we start to trust them, we're looking for reasons to or not to be committed. How many of you did this with your business? Felt awesome. You were super excited about what it meant and what it could make for you and different things. So you decided, I'm going to trust this, but without a commitment. So what do? We're investigating our commitment every day, looking for signs, whether we should be committed or shouldn't be committed, because we're trusting this. But we're trusting this with no foundation. It's like trying to hang on to sand in your hands. And so something happens that shakes you a little bit, and so we lose trust, right? We didn't lose trust. We exposed our lack of commitment. You'll be well certain in your life to be biased to the fact that where you have lost trust is usually just exposing a lack of commitment. And it's one of the hardest things you'll do, but recommit. In fact, for many of us, it's commit for the first time and reinstate trust, because now you understand the direction that it's supposed to go. Okay? Just catching up on comments real quick. Where have I heard this before? Okay. Awesome. Okay. Now, let's get to the whole point of today. Just to put a bow on that, for any of you that jumped in the middle or were still over your head, the point is, without a commitment, trust will always be sabotaged and you'll be victim to your feelings. With a commitment, trust is reinstated and the feelings you're really looking for come afterwards, like the marshmallow experiment. You can look it up, okay? But today, we're talking about the obligation cycle. This is something that makes it really difficult for people to break out of their unhealthy habits of thinking. Even with something like the habit finder showing them the thought processes that are getting in their way and the strengths that it shows you. For most people, it shows you more strength than sabotage. And those are often untapped because of the sabotage. Why? Because what's sabotaging is usually strength that are out of control. It's like having muscular imbalance. It's like having a super, super strong right arm and a really, really weak left arm. This left arm can still do a lot of really cool things. You just might not notice because of how strong this one is and the way it's creating problems for the left arm. Okay? Weird example, but hopefully you get it. Obligation cycle, though. This is where we're going to take one of the number one challenges, okay? As Daniel Putnam said, the number one tool to maintaining self-deception comes from this. Being busy, which is a reaction to the obligation cycle. And here's the obligation cycle, okay? We have, first of all, no magic secret here. We have an obligation. Right then, from that point on, we have entered the obligation cycle. And how do we know we have an obligation? Because it's something we have to do. It's something we must do. It's something we are supposed to do. Okay? And it's something that we should do. Those are the four primary indicators of an obligation. It's something you should, have to, must, or supposed to. Now here's the risk. Many of us have things that how can I illustrate this? Many of us have things that we want to do, okay? I want to do this, okay? For those of you who can't read, that says want. And those of you who can read and realize my handwriting is terrible, also for you, it says want, okay? So this is something I want to do. I want to succeed in my business. I want to serve people. I want to become a better leader. I want to be a better parent. I want. And then what happens, what we don't realize, is we're connected to the want, but our unhealthy habits of thinking go, so we should do this if that's what we want. And we have to do this if that's what we want. And we're supposed to do this if that's what we want. And we must do this if that's what we want. What happened to the want? We still feel it sometimes when we step back and think, but I was doing it because I wanted to. No, that's where it started, but then the unhealthy habits of thinking jumped in and muddied the water, wrecked everything up, made it really difficult to be able to do that, okay? So don't just look at obligations as you only feel like you should and have to and must. Some of the more dangerous ones are the ones that you want to do, that you're choosing to do, but are plastered with tiny little challenges of have to, should, and must, and supposed to, okay? So first we have the obligation. And being obligated, okay, is heavy. It's difficult. Having an obligation is like throwing a bunch of extra rocks into your backpack. It weighs us down. I'll give you an example right now. Okay, I'll give you a second to do this. I want you to say have to, should, must, supposed to. Just like that. And you'll get a great idea of what this feels like energy-wise. Have to, should, must, supposed to. Once you've had an opportunity to experience that, then I want you to say want to, get to, choose to, command. That's the trigger, but we'll get to that in a second, okay? But I wanted you to hear and feel the weight between between the two, okay? Now, we have an obligation, and carrying that weight gets us tired. It creates fatigue, which is also known as fatigue, okay? When we're carrying more load than we can handle, which life is already difficult. We strap should, must, have to, supposed to on top of the load we're already carrying. No wonder we're all getting so exhausted, so tired. And some of us, all of us, after this fatigue, we decide to start rebelling. We decide to rebel. Some of us fight harder and force our bodies to burn us out. Some of us play victim and, oh, there's just too much I have to do. I don't really want this anymore. Remember the example, the want? It's now all covered up and muddy. Well, I guess I didn't want to be that anyway. I guess I didn't really want it. I guess they didn't really want it. No, it's not a matter of arguing whether you really wanted it. It's that you created the wrong equation. You started with an obligation, you got fatigued, and now you're rebelling. And we can rebel both two different directions, okay? We can rebel and fight, or we can rebel and flee. Either one eventually leads to the same result in the next step, and that is that we quit. You fight hard enough against something you can never beat, and you'll quit. You run away, and that in and of itself was quitting. So we go from the obligation to fatigue to our form of rebellion. What is your form of rebellion? How do you rebel when you get tired? Do you fight harder, or do you just throw in the towel, cut your losses? Either way, you're going to end up quitting. Whether you quit for an afternoon, you quit for a season, you quit for a week, you quit for the rest of your life. Sometimes we've been going through this cycle so long and so often that we just totally bail on everything. And we quit. Quit brings a really interesting character into the picture. Remember, the amount of time here is different for everybody. After we quit, the amount of time that it takes for the next is different for everybody. For some of us, it's a couple hours after we quit. For some of us, it's a couple weeks, a couple days. Oftentimes, we'll quit and not stay out of this cycle long enough, okay? Then, after that, we introduce the character of guilt, okay? Guilt plays a really interesting role. Guilt is when we come around the bottom of this cycle and we have no choice but to quit because we fought too hard with the wrong levels of awareness, incorrect principles, unhealthy habits of thinking, or we flee, we ran away, and naturally quit by default. But eventually guilt gets the best of us. And what does guilt do? Well, guilt has us looking inward, which then reaffirms our thoughts that have us convinced that we should be doing so that we can be feeling, so that we can get rid of these thoughts. and we find ourselves right back in the wrong direction of where we started today. And what do? We recommit. And what do we recommit to? We recommit to obligation. Okay? I want you to see this. We have an obligation. This could be something you want, but it's been plastered day to day, driving, trying to get through with what you should do, what you have to do, what you're supposed to do, what you must do. And that's exhausting for anybody, no matter how resilient you are, which will eventually cause rebellion, whether you're trying to recreate the wheel or you don't stick to the system or whatever, which causes us to either fight it harder or run away, both of which result in quitting. It's inevitable. And then depending on a certain amount of time from when we quit to when we start to come back around, guilt gets introduced. And guilt blinds us to a level of awareness that can allow us to break free of this. And rather than recommit to obligation, we can recommit to decisions and principles and peace of mind. So, how do you break this cycle? Well, the first and best way, I need a brainwash. Ava, this is just stuff that makes you human. That's one of the risks right there. And I'm really glad you said that, Ava. I'm really glad that you said that, because understand, okay? Everybody got this? You need to come back to the recording for this cycle. I'm going to erase it, okay? But Ava just said something really important. And then I'll give you the first step to breaking this cycle, okay? Ava said, I need a brainwash. One of the risks of talking about this stuff, talking about how we can improve, is the very first step. Here's where you are. Here's where you want to be, okay? We'll call this future you, okay? And let's say that there is this step, this step, this step, this step to get to you. This very first step is a systemic one. And if we're not careful, the next step could be a systemic one. And if the next step is a systemic one, if we can even make it that far, then we're going to come back here, if not further back, from guilt, burnout, which is the worst kind of BO, okay, or other victim challenges and different things that we create for ourselves. And here's the risk. The first step being systemic, remember we talked about this last week, I believe. Systemic is all or nothing. So as I'm pointing this out, Ava shared what a lot of us are probably thinking. Wow, there's a lot wrong with me. That's an incorrect step. Because systemically, if it can only focus on all or nothing, okay, it's got to be perfect or not at all. It's got to be everything or nothing. We're immediately setting ourselves up on a systemic platform that will drive us into obligation. So as we're trying to grow to get here, we're just making it harder and harder to make every step because we believe it's all or nothing. Okay? So Ava, the very fact that you are on this call and that you're in one of our groups means that you are willing to take this step more productively, that you are willing to embrace your own genius, your own good. Because when you took this first step today or in the group or any other time, and we fell victim to this systemic all or nothing, all we can focus on is the nothing, because we can't sustain all. All we can do is fail because we don't feel like we can sustain the success. But these blips that get you to where you want to be, these are just moments. They're just moments. Moments and choices. Breaking the obligation cycle one of the elements, not the first one, but one of them, I'll get to the first one as we wrap up, is realizing that these are moments and choices. These aren't total transformation. Total transformation is not something that we do. It is a natural outcome of becoming more conscious of our choices, more conscious of our moments, not systemically conscious, where it's all or nothing, becoming more extrinsically conscious, meaning we're allowing common sense and practical judgment to play a role in our growth, which will then give us an opportunity to tap into our intrinsic genius and our gifting and what makes us unique, rather than hear this stuff and go, I just scrolled down. It's too hard and I'll never get there. Ava, thank you again for sharing. This is why it feels too hard. You're allowing your mind to trick you, to believe that it's all or nothing. Because here's the reality. Here's you. Here's the future you. Tick, 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 tick. But here's how it would really look. Okay? This is how it really happens. Okay? We teach in journeys. Okay? You're here and you want to get to here because that's systemically makes sense in terms of steps and ideas. But here's how it really is. Here's you. Okay? And here's something that's holding you back. Here's something that's holding you back. Here's something that's holding you back. And all you're willing to do is realize that everything you need, who you want to be, is already there. We're just unpacking layers. With higher levels of consciousness, correct principles, more awareness, love, connection, using our mind constructively, and suddenly you unlock you. And then something happens. Something happens and we go, oh crap, I've locked myself up again. Oh. Or we can just go, hey, I know this game. I know how to do this. And we go back into creation. We go back into the principles. We go back into connection and love. And maybe we get right here and then something happens, causes a little blip. Okay, no problem. I've got moments and choices. And I had a lot of good moments on the way around. It's okay that I had something that tripped me up. So now I'm going to go back to moments and choices, connection and love. And I'm going to unlock myself again. And then all we realize is that it's not all or nothing. It's not either this or blah or this. Those aren't your only two options. It's about realizing that that version of you, the unlocked version of you, the real, genuine, authentic version of you is what you get access to in moments and with choices. Not forever, for moments, from the quality and consciousness of your choices. And if it's all or nothing, you are immediately dismissing the value of the moment and blinding yourself of your choices and how much control you do have. And the obligation cycle, when we throw should and must and have to on top of it, loves to make it difficult to enjoy the moments and difficult to understand the consciousness and the accountability. Okay? Charlene, I want an eraser that works that. To make those choices. Okay? Can you give me a practical example? Sure. Ava, here's you. Okay? And you start getting training. I need to do this with my business. I need to not do this with my business. I can clearly see how I'm not adding up. Things that aren't happening. I should have been at a higher rank by now. I'm lazy. I'm blah, blah, blah. You've got all this noise going on. Okay? Well, the first thing you want to do, actually, let me back up. Before we get to moments and choices, let's address how to take the cover off first so that you can start peeling away at this. And that is to, first thing you want to do, Ava, and anybody else, is increase your sensitivity to should, have to, must, and supposed to. Because this will just thicken these walls. Okay? This will lock it down and put a padlock on it if you are stuck in have to, should, must, and supposed to. So let's go back to what we were talking about. Listen for your language of have to, should, must, supposed to. If you're finding yourself down here from any of those ladders on that step, the way to get out is I want to, I get to, I choose to, and command. The last piece is critical. If you just say, I want to, I get to, I choose to, and then just kind of, that wasn't a conscious choice. That wasn't an intention. Okay? That wasn't a focus. That wasn't a drive. That was just wanting to feel different. You don't feel different by talking different. You feel different by talking different and then commanding your thoughts to go the direction that you want. I want to. It's like a runway for an airplane. Okay? I want to. I get to. I choose to. Command. And then dive into a moment or a choice. See, the challenge is, Ava, for your practical example, is you're trying to get this to happen either too fast or feeling like it should go away forever. But if you can fall in love with moments and choices, then you can get to this space for 5 seconds and it can be awesome, rather than focused on the 3 hours that you weren't in that space. You can harness the 3 seconds, the 10 seconds, the 15 minutes that you were here because it was a great moment. And you can become more conscious of the choices you made to get there so that when you slip out of it, you know how to get back. And you don't spend the whole time getting back going, oh, I have to do this. It's not working for me. I just can't pull it off. And you can apply that to any business, any relationship, anything. Okay? But if you're willing to fall in love with the moments and choices, and you're willing to want to, get to, choose to, command, so you can take off. And similar to learning to fly, the reason the Wilbur brothers were so effective is because they were okay with falling. They just wanted to fall slower. And they knew if they could fall slower each time, they were making progress. But they were totally okay with falling. Flying wasn't the all or nothing goal. It was the moments and the choices that they kept making that led to them actually being able to fly, because they were committed to getting there. They were committed to everything that comes with that. Okay? They were committing to removing this no matter what the setbacks, no matter how many layers got piled on this afternoon, no matter how many layers got piled on the next day. So Ava, if this isn't hitting home, it's because you've piled a lot of systemic thought and obligation on top of you. Now, although you have the cognitive ability technically to let go of that, it's impossible because it's been on there long enough, and this is something we'll talk about in a future power session, but it's been on there long enough, this stuff, the layers keeping you from you, have been on there long enough that now you need them. They've been there so long that now you need them. You need the obligation. You need the disappointment. You need the chaos. You need the stress. Ouch. All the more important reason to allow yourself to be human, to start one step at a time, to be able to just trust that you have the capacity for 5 minutes to make different conscious choices, to take that runway. All right, for the next 5 minutes, I want to, I get to, I choose to, command, and then go obey your command, and then celebrate it. Even if while you're celebrating it, this stuff's piling back on, because you know that you are still there. You are intact. It's a frustrating process to reprogram the mind. It's why we keep opting back to just focusing on what we do or don't do and what we have and don't have, so that we can somehow manipulate the feelings of what we're lacking, because that's what we think we're supposed to do. I get it. This is frustrating. This is counterintuitive for many. That, well, Paul, can't you just tell me what I should do, what I shouldn't do? Well, isn't that exactly what put us in this position in the first place? So Ava, you can keep resisting it, keep fighting it, or let go of the need to play this victim card and get to work. You don't have to get to work for 12 hours today, but do something that awakens you for 5 minutes, for 30 minutes, for an hour. Put the energy you're putting into proving why you're a piece of crap into becoming who you already are. Say that with all the love in the world. Put the energy that you're trying to use to prove you're a piece of crap into allowing yourself to be who you already are. And be okay with the fact that you won't feel like that person all the time. But they're always there. You are always there. The real, genuine, authentic you. And you unlock that with want to, get to, choose to, command. And what are you commanding? Higher levels of consciousness and action of the moments you're creating and the choices you made to create them. Okay? Woo! Yes, and that's totally fine. I understand, I think. So keep it simple. Keep it really simple, Ava, because it's obligation. It's sabotaging thought processes that pull us into that all or nothing. Because if we can get into all or nothing, it knows it wins every time. Because we can't be all. We can't be perfect. So let's avoid those feelings. And when you know you're in that trap, focus on I want to, I get to, I choose to, and command. And be okay with that command being just a little bit of liftoff, like the Wilbur brothers got, and then you're immediately back on the ground. Can you imagine if every time they came back to the ground, they just went, oh my gosh, this isn't working. We're never going to fly. We're never going to make this happen. I just don't trust this process. Well, that trust conversation never came up because they were committed. They had made a decision. And that's where I leave you today. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week.